The Russian army just accomplished an incredible victory, which is reminiscent of George Washington's crossing of the Delaware. Good morning. It's March 13th. I'm Diane Sare, president of the LaRouche organization. Some of you may have heard about this a little bit, but I really want to share with you what happened over the last, really, I think it took quite some time to prepare and over a week to carry off. So I'll say the last couple of weeks, which is that the Russian Lieutenant General Abdi Alaudinov led 800 special forces to retake Kursk and the city of Sudzha, where the Ukrainians had invaded last August. There's been a kind of ferocious fighting there. And clearly, Zelensky wanted to use this as a bargaining chip to try and get back some Ukrainian territory, despite the fact, or formerly Ukrainian territory, that people in the Donbass, Zaporozhye, and Kherson all have voted in referenda to rejoin the Russian Federation rather than be subject to a pro-Nazi Ukrainian regime. So what happened was they took an unused, no longer in use gas pipeline, which is about 1.4 meters in diameter. That means at the exact center of the circle, 9 miles long, to go 9 miles in a dark tunnel to come up on the other side behind the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk Oblast. So, of course, this was a total shock to the Ukrainians. They did not realize they had been surrounded. Suddenly, they have Russians on all sides and are trapped in a pocket. This pipeline, as I said, is 9 miles long, and people had to go hunched over. Imagine that in the dark, terrible air. I believe they had gas masks, although despite that, one of these soldiers interviewed about it said they were in incredible pain. They used up all their painkillers in the first 72 hours. I don't know if they slept down there. They went in groups of 5, spaced apart, about 10 meters apart, and got all 800 soldiers through with their equipment, and then surrounded the Ukrainians in a major victory, and of course has taken away this bargaining chip. So this is extraordinary. I would encourage people to watch video footage of this online, and I think you'll be quite impressed by what they did, the stamina, the courage, the endurance to march 9 miles in a pipeline that's not even as wide as you are tall, crawling, hunching over in really difficult circumstances to be able to catch the Ukrainian army totally off guard. And I would remind people that this is the 80th anniversary of the defeat of the Nazis, of VE Day. So the 80th anniversary, I think the resolve of the Russian people, who lost 27 million, the former Soviet Union lost 27 million people fighting Adolf Hitler. They have not forgotten their veterans. And I think that gives their determination a special force, as we saw in the American misnamed Civil War, the War of the Rebellion, or the British-funded war against the Union. On July 4th, in 1863, we had the victories both at Gettysburg and Vicksburg. There are certain things that just resonate, and defeating fascism is clearly one of them, and hopefully more and more Americans will be sharing that. Now, at the same time, you had, frankly, an outrageous appearance of the security minister for the European Union, this Estonian woman named Kaja Kallas. She was the former prime minister of Estonia. She is a total Russophobe. And the statement by the Russian permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, and I'm going to read you part of his statement because you will hear their response. He said, the European Union was originally designed as an economic project to prevent war in Europe through the cooperation of former opponents and enemies. But what we've observed lately is nothing but the degradation into a political entity seeking to sow discord on our continent and trigger this very war. And by the beginning of 2025, this process is almost completed and the degradation has reached its bottom. The once sensible integration club used to promote cooperation projects with Russia, but now it has morphed into an ossified, aggressive, Russophobic bloc that staked its energy, economic, social, and financial well-being on a pointless confrontation with its eastern neighbor. Today, it is more clear than ever that the European Union is rapidly losing this confrontation. And of course, that is because under President Donald Trump, the United States is no longer going to be party to this drive, this completely ineffective drive to destroy Russia. He says, Ms. Kaja Kallas, the new EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, is well known in Russia. We remember what she said when she was Prime Minister of Estonia. Russia's defeat is not a bad thing, and it is not a bad thing if a big power is actually made much smaller. How can such immoral assertions be treated in my country, given that in the last year alone, the number of civilians in Russia who have suffered from the Ukrainian armed forces amounted to 5,500 people, 809 of whom were killed. 347 children were among the casualties, and 51 children died. And earlier this year, when the village of Ruskoye Porechnoye in Kursk Oblast was liberated, we discovered torture chambers in the basements of residential houses set up by the Ukrainian army. There were found bodies of 7 locals, mostly elderly people. They had been tortured to death by the Ukrainian Nazis. And that word is not used lightly. You may remember seeing photographs of the tattoos worn by some of the Ukrainian militias, particularly the Azov battalion, or I shouldn't say militia, they're part of the Ukrainian armed forces, tattoos of Adolf Hitler, swastikas, etc. One might ask why people who seem to be supporting Israel also are supporting such types in Ukraine. But then I guess if you look at the Israeli tactics against the Palestinian people, you see why it's the same mindset, the genocide being carried out in Gaza. Now, speaking, well, I'll come to that in a minute. I just want to say, so while Secretary of State Rubio was in Riyadh meeting with a Ukrainian delegation negotiating for a ceasefire, which I am not sure that Russia can accept. That is not what Russia is saying, and I hope the United States understands that Russia has won this war. But we'll see, because as usual with the mainstream media and reports coming out, I don't presume to think we've heard the full extent of this. And we will probably hear more in the coming days, both Russia's response and what President Trump's actual position is, or President Trump's response to President Putin's response. Obviously, we are working very quickly to bring an end to this conflict, which has taken over 1 million lives, but it has to be on terms that are acceptable to the Russian Federation. And Ukraine, having lost the war, having been used as a proxy, really is not going to have much say in this, nor should they, frankly. Their rights should be respected as a sovereign nation under rule of law, but not the crimes which have been committed by them. Now, Macron, for his part, held a meeting in Paris of 37 nations of NATO's military leaders, not the United States, behind closed doors. And what it is said is that they are discussing having ground troops in Ukraine, which is, of course, absurd. Europe is in no position to have a war against Russia without the United States. And frankly, even with the United States, we have not been training to have that kind of war, a ground war. It's really absurd and out of reality. So, as I said, we will know more perhaps later today about the extent of the peace negotiations, where this is going. Now, on the question of the media and freedom of speech, I have to bring up the case of the he graduated Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil, who had his apartment stormed by ICE officers. He is not here any longer on a student visa. He has a green card. He is a permanent resident. I have heard excerpts of his speeches. I have not been at the particular rallies where he has spoken, but what I have heard, no one has presented anything from him calling for violence, supporting terrorism, anything anti-Semitic. So this is really outrageous. I think it is a test. It has to be opposed. A judge has at least issued a stay on deporting him. He has been moved to Jena, Louisiana. He has a wife, an American citizen in New York, who is 8 months pregnant. And I think this is a test by the Zionist lobby, aka the British Empire, on whether they can get away with such actions, silencing people who are pointing to the crimes that have been committed by the Israelis against the Palestinian people. And to what end? But to create the conditions actually to undermine the Trump presidency by getting the United States dragged into a wider war against Iran, a wider war in the region. We have a complete mess now in Syria, where we have installed a moderate terrorist as the head of state, with horrible massacres of the Christian population and Sunni population. More is coming out on that as well. Now, I do think, as Cliff Kirikoff, my guest on my symposium this past Friday on Christian Zionism, asserted that President Trump does want to be a peacemaker. He does want to end these wars. That is extremely important. The fact that he is broken in this way from the British Empire is great. That gives great hope to the world that the United States might regain its own identity. However, there is a big vulnerability, which is the looming collapse of the transatlantic system. And unfortunately, I have not heard from anyone in the Trump administration that they understand how to deal with this. Tariffs are not going to help. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is not going to do it. Raising interest rates, lowering it, forget it. Nothing short of what Lyndon LaRouche said in his 4 laws. Put the system through bankruptcy reorganization, reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act, separating the banks between commercial and investment banks, nationalize the Federal Reserve, and then invest in doing those things which increase the productive powers of your workforce. Modern high-speed rail, nuclear power, water management, modern healthcare, an educational system that prepares young people to work productively, which we have no interest in doing that apparently right now, but there's nothing productive for them to do unless we move with these tasks, and including, and I agree with Elon Musk on this case, we must colonize Mars. The space program has always been a major driver for human creativity and innovation, and we should do it together with China, Russia, the European Space Agency, India, all spacefaring nations. There is an enormous amount to discover in the universe, and while sometimes some of our colleagues, our brothers and sisters in the human race, get very arrogant about it, we haven't discovered everything yet. There's a lot to learn. So, as Harley has said, the world is changing rapidly. I would encourage people tomorrow to listen in on the International Peace Coalition call for further updates at 11 a.m. The information for that is on the Schiller Institute. And as always, please donate to the LaRouche organization. Sign up for a monthly recurring donation and you'll get the daily intelligence from EIR.